Whoa. Hey, Stephen.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, it's back. Your screensaver had popped up.
Okay.
Um, Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's PHTV Policy Committee webinar. Uh, today's we're lucky to have Stephen Carlyle from Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation today to speak to us about Manitoba's Conservation Trust, 100 million for conservation. Please go ahead whenever you're ready, Stephen.
Okay, thank you again, Ian. Yeah, well, welcome all. Thanks for attending the session here, and I'd just like to extend a thanks to the PHJV Policy Committee for giving us the opportunity to share this exciting news in Manitoba and talk a little bit about the $100 million that's been provided. This really is, I think, a unique opportunity for organizations, environmental conservation organizations across Manitoba to get on the ground conservation projects that are contributing to ecological goods and services. As far as we know, this is the largest endowment of its kind in Canada, and it really is designed to support conservation in perpetuity. It's also intended to be flexible and fund innovative projects, which even including annual payments. Now, this is something that has taken MHHC off of its traditional course of on-the-ground program delivery, including delivery of the PHJV implementation plan in Manitoba. And it's taken us onto a course of giving away money, and that's something that we have not done. And so it's been an exciting journey in figuring out how to do that. And we've had lots of support from other organizations and advice, and that's been greatly appreciated. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Gabrielle Miller, and she is actually here with me on the presentation in case you guys ask any real tough questions, then Gabrielle can pop in. But she's the grants associate for the Conservation Trust, and she's been instrumental in getting this off the ground. And as well with Gabrielle, we have another grants associate, Krista Doucette, who has also been fundamental. So these two people here, they've been helped us get going here, and it's been a huge success in year one. So it's thanks to them. In terms of myself, I'm Stephen Carlyle. I'm the program development manager here at Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, and I've been for about the last 10 years been involved on the delivery side of MHHC, and I continue to be as well. But I am a little bit involved with the Conservation Trust, and so it's broadening my role as it is broadening MHHC's role in general. For a bit of background on MHHC, though, we are a Crown Corporation based in Manitoba. We're sort of, as a Crown Corporation, we fall under the guise of sustainable development in the province here, and yeah, we're one of the 3 North American Wetland Conservation Act grantees, recipients in Canada, along with Ducks Unlimited and Nature Conservancy. So that's us in a quick nutshell. But in terms of the presentation here, a bit of an outline. I wanted to start with the Conservation Trust origins, how it came about, talk about some of the outcomes and the metrics for the trust, some of the project categories, the application criteria, some of the nuts and bolts of how we're getting this done, talking about the review process, and then talking about some of our real first successes here in the first intake that has just recently been announced, and checks are large fake checks are going out the door pretty steadily now, and then the smaller real ones are following quickly behind. So it's a pretty exciting time for us. At the same time, though, we are planning for the next application round and making a few tweaks. This, I don't think anybody's going to get things perfectly the first time out, and fortunately, just some minor tweaks, and I think we're good to go for the process forward. So that's my objective here for the talk today. And if there's questions, I'd be happy to address those perhaps at the end of not the proposal, but the presentation. So we're starting off with the partnership. This is a partnership between the Manitoba government, province of Manitoba, the Winnipeg Foundation, and MHHC, so the Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation. It's a long, ugly name, so I'll just use MHHC. This is an agreement that was established between these three parties. $102 million has been provided. This is basically outstanding. I mean, this is a huge amount of money going to conservation. And this money has been provided to the Winnipeg Foundation. This foundation manages, I think it's approximately $1 billion in assets. And they have a really tried and true record. And based on their experience and their funding portfolio, we estimate that the interest accrued on the $100 million will be in the $5 million per year range. And so that $5 million is basically the money that MHHC has been tasked to provide to worthy projects that are enhancing conservation in Manitoba. So the government has actually signed an agreement with the Winnipeg Foundation and MHHC. Future governments, and this is really, really key, future governments can never take that money back. That money, that $102 million, has gone to the foundation. It's going to forever be in that foundation, and it's irrevocable. So it's pretty amazing. I think this is, as far as we know, this is very, very unique for this size of a contribution in Canada. This fund was linked as a part of the province's Manitoba Climate and Green Plan, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But it is within there's 4 pillars within this Climate and Green Plan, and a nature pillar is one of the fundamental 4 pillars. Another aspect of the Climate and Green Plan was a carbon tax. And depending on where the webinar participants are from, you may or may not know, but Manitoba has since dropped a Manitoba-based carbon tax, and we're going on the federal carbon tax. But this has not impacted the endowment fund, as that endowment fund was not going to be generated from revenue from a carbon tax. It was just revenues generated internally by the government, and so fortunately this endowment was not affected by the cancellation of a Manitoba-based carbon tax. So that's good news for us, and good news for conservation in Manitoba. The announcement for the trust did occur on the 10th of December at the Manitoba Conservation Districts Association conference. It was a lot of the Conservation Trust will hopefully be delivered by conservation districts across Manitoba, as well as other organizations. So this was a really interesting place to announce it. And so yeah, the beginning of December of 2018, it was announced, and we got some really good coverage. The Free Press and the Cooperator and Cattle Country, a variety of papers throughout Manitoba and Prairie, Canada as well. So that was the initial announcement, and then there was a project announcement when we selected all of the individual projects to be funded, and this was a big announcement with the tall gentleman there in the center of the picture. That's Premier Pallister, and so he came out and announced there was a big event, and announced the release of the first $2.2 million in projects. On the left of the image there is Rick Frost from the Winnipeg Foundation. To his right is Brent Pools. He is the chairman of MHHC. And then we have Minister Rochelle Squires, the Minister of Sustainable Development. And then on the far right is the CEO, Carla Gwynn, of Ducks Unlimited. and she provided some commentary at the announcement. So lots of media coverage, lots of press. It's a really good news announcement. In terms of the outcomes for the trust, though, this was the main intent, basically to try and mitigate floods and droughts, help improve Manitoba's water quality, improve carbon sequestration, soil health, conserve biodiversity, and increase production of harvestable wildlife. So, in particular I think of the PHJV, and to connect back to the policy committee here is the production of harvestable wildlife and biodiversity are really key outcomes of or goals of the Prairie Habitat Joint Venture, and those other outcomes for the trust also align with some of the programming that PHJV partners do. And wetlands in themselves, they provide many of these outcomes, and so I think there's a real strong connection between what PHJV partners are doing on the ground in Manitoba here, particularly given that this fund's restricted to Manitoba. But yeah, some real strong connections, and I think the Conservation Trust is well positioned to support the implementation of the PHJV implementation plan for Prairie Parkland region. In terms of measuring trust outcomes, the province, MHHC, we are managing the fund. We are deciding who we're gonna fund, but we also have to report up to the province. Although the province can't ever take the money back, they could decide someone else needs to manage the fund if they wanted to, and we have to make sure that we are delivering on the key outcomes for the province. And so we've been given some criteria on how the province, so sustainable development, will be assessing MHHC's effectiveness in achieving the trust outcomes through our partners we're funding. And so in terms of water quality, one of the key things is going to be incremental phosphorus capture. Water quantity, be incremental water storage. Carbon, it'd be carbon storage and aggregation, harvest of wildlife, productivity, acreage of that is restored, enhanced habitat, and then biological diversity, acres conserved, enhanced, restored. And an interesting thing that was added that sometimes is ignored in a lot of our conservation-focused activities is really the impact on the economy and the impact on jobs. I know PHJV partners, including Ducks Unlimited, has done work on looking at the impact of conservation actions in providing jobs and providing funding to landowners. And this is something that we want to try and capture through the Conservation Trust. In part because it is a lot of money, and it's a lot of government revenues that have gone that are derived from taxpayers in Manitoba that are, we want to make sure that we're delivering good value back to those taxpayers, because it's not the government's money, it's the people of Manitoba's money that's being spent here. So in terms of the trust overall categories, there's 5 categories. The first one, and is one of the main focuses of the Conservation Trust, is watersheds. And so here, we want to be able to fund activities that are tied directly to established priorities within integrated watershed management plans. And so in Manitoba, conservation districts are charged with the task of developing integrated watershed management plans for their region, and implementing those plans, basically. So developing actions that will deliver on the goals and objectives of those plans. And so, the Conservation Trust is really targeted to try and address those planning priorities. And quite frankly, it's addressed to provide support to conservation districts as well. Activities including water quality and quantity as key EGS outcomes, and also contribute to the other outcomes of the trust are highly desirable and will get funded over. Basically, if you can address more of the conservation trust outcomes, your project is going to rank higher. In terms of the overall funding, and again, it'll be about $5 million going forward annually. About roughly 60% of that's going to be assigned to watersheds here. I'm going to give you some percentages. They're not locked in stone, but just to kind of give you a feel of where the weighting of the trust is going to be. So about 60% of the funding available on an annual basis is going to be targeted for watersheds. Again, of PHJV interest, in addition to watersheds, is habitat and wildlife. And these projects are really designed focusing on improving habitat quality and quantity. So protecting those key natural areas, of which Manitoba has a significant amount, but they are under threat. And so protecting those and preserving those for the future is important, as well as the populations for key wildlife species and suites of species. And really fundamental, again, similar to the watershed plans and tying to integrated watershed management plans. For the habitat and wildlife, we want to make sure that things aren't just happening on an ad hoc basis here and there. We want to make sure that they're tied into regional, provincial, or national plans. And I would definitely include the PHJV implementation plan as one of these national or regional, I guess, plans that would feed this criteria. And we are really looking, when reviewing the proposals, we're really looking for projects that are directly making that link, and that's going to help them score higher. In terms of another one, that was connecting people to nature. So these are, a lot focused on kind of urbanish areas and getting people out into nature, developing a support and a love for nature, and as well educating the general public or students about nature, and just making those connections and making them aware of the ecological goods and services or the natural benefits, nature's benefits that they provide, that nature provides to people. So this was the fourth category, the third category, and about 2.5% of the funding is allocated to this. So really, I mean, the weight of the funding is going to watershed-based activities and habitat and wildlife activities. This is much reduced in sort of the connecting people to nature, but we didn't want to make sure that it was relevant for a wide range of people in Manitoba. An interesting one, the fourth category is innovation and conservation planning, and this is really to support really innovative new projects that are going beyond the norm and looking at new approaches to land and water and wildlife conservation, and also to support connections at a higher or a larger spatial area, spatial level. For example, the integrated watershed management plans for conservation districts, they're on individual watershed areas, and they're kind of almost sub-watershed. They're smaller areas within Manitoba. Some of the projects that we funded this year tried to connect or provide linkages across several integrated watershed management plans and try and look at a larger perspective. For example, the watersheds that feed into Lake Manitoba and how conservation districts can target programming and activities within the Lake Manitoba perspective rather than within the Dauphin River perspective, for example. So that's an interesting one there. Again, about 2.5% is going to be has been allocated to that. And the last one was soil health. This is basically a perennial cover. Bit unfortunate this year is that we actually didn't get any soil health applications for the trust, and so that was kind of surprising. But we're going to have a look and get some feedback, and we may extend it to soil health and agroecology categories to try and broaden it a little bit, and try and get some applications in this area as well. But again, about 2.5% of the $5 million is going to be pigeonholed for soil health or soil health and agroecology. So those are the 5 categories: watersheds, wildlife and habitat, innovation and planning, soil health, and connecting people to nature. So in terms of the application process itself, project proponents, they must address an evident conservation need. It's a priority for the Conservation Trust. So we're not looking to fund everyone else's priorities. The trust does have outcomes that we have to adhere to. We as an MHHC, we're going to be reporting to the province, and we're held accountable for that. So we have to make sure that what we're funding does support what the goals of the trust are, and those are hard coded right into the agreement with the province and Winnipeg Foundation. And they have to have a significant, measurable, and preferably multiple EGS outcomes or conservation benefits, have an effective engagement with partners. This was a big thing for the Conservation Trust. There's a lot of partners out there, a lot of organizations that are really good at conservation, and many of those are partners of the PHJV and implementing conservation under that umbrella. But we really wanted to encourage new partners, smaller partners, to apply to the funding and perhaps connect with some of the bigger, more traditional PHJV partners and sort of bring them along and expand the tent a little bit here in Manitoba. And another criteria is it had to be a 2-to-1 match ratio. Some of the smaller partners, this is a bit of an issue for, but again, this was nothing that MHHC had control over, or honestly, we can't change it. It is a part of the agreement, and so everything has to be done on a 2-to-1 match ratio, in that 2 partner dollars need to be matched to 1 trust dollar. So it's continuing with the eligibility criteria. It's got to be municipal Manitoba. This is really where lots of the intensive conservation concerns are going on. It's in southern Manitoba. I mean, Manitoba is a huge province, and while there's concerns outside municipal area, this is really focused on engaging people and landowners out into the landscape, and so that connection occurs in municipal Manitoba, not on Crown land up in the north. Eligible applicants, really community-based, not-for-profit groups. That was a key focus on here. That right from the start was trying to address, provide funding to small game and fish groups, or small wildlife federation organization, like Manitoba Wildlife Federation, or going up to provincially based organizations, and including national not-for-profit groups with established Manitoba operations. So this does not include what I affectionately call kind of the big guys like NCC and Ducks Unlimited, because they do have core operations and activities going on in Manitoba, and both of those partners of the PHJV were successful applicants in this first round. In terms of who is not eligible, organizations without established operations in Manitoba. So that's something like World Wildlife Fund or something comes to mind. Governments are not eligible. and that does include Indigenous governments as well. It's governments kind of writ large. Individuals are not eligible, as well as for-profit organizations are not eligible. And it's not listed here, but of course, due to conflict of interest, MHHC is not eligible for any kind of delivery, on-the-ground delivery funding for this project too. So that's kind of a bit of a twist for the corporation here, in that, yeah, we're supporting our partners in getting activities done on the ground, not delivering them ourselves. So it's kind of fun, though. Ineligible activities, anything that an individual or a group has been told to do by the government or it's under regulatory requirement, of course, we're not going to fund that. Applied research, conferences, lectures, that kind of stuff, policy promotion, advocacy, rearing or rehabilitating wildlife in captivity, or an ongoing control of invasive species. Basically what this trust was targeted for is on-the-ground activities that are tied to the working landscape in Manitoba. We really wanted activities that are out there on privately owned lands in southern Manitoba, and not helping fund research, or conferences, or and the other stuff that's listed there. While we completely recognize that that's very, very important, and we're fully supportive of that occurring, the Conservation Trust dollars will not directly fund that. However, in saying that, although the trust fund dollars won't fund it, some of these activities can be used as match for within applications. What is eligible is kind of the range of typical things for grants. So salaries and wages, contractor costs, travel, field costs, materials and supplies, printing, equipment leases, and incentive payments. So that's the range. So those incentive payments, they can be, for example, annual lease payments, or it could be even easements, but it can't be land purchases though, or purchasing of the equipment, or not equipment, but purchasing of infrastructure for landowners. That kind of thing is all okay. Ineligible land purchases, major equipment, big assets like buildings, research costs, feeding or control of wildlife species, and fish rearing, farming, stocking. Those kind of projects are ineligible for the Conservation Trust criteria, but can be used as match. The reason we excluded the fish stuff is because in Manitoba there's the Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, or FWEF, and a lot of its focus is for in-stream fish activities, and so there wasn't the need to have Conservation Trust dollars fund that as well. Now, what the trust fund will support is riparian activities or shoreline activities that may or likely will have a benefit to fish stocks and fish. Fully supportive of that. It's just mainly under the waterline activities is something that the trust is not really funding. So in terms of the application review and approval process, Gabrielle Miller and Krista Doucette are our grants associates right now. They do an initial administrative review, and then it goes to a TAC, a Technical Advisory Committee, who reviews and provides recommendations to the MHHC board. And ultimately, it's the MHHC Board of Directors that has the ultimate authority to approve the slate of projects or individual projects within each of the 5 Conservation Trust categories. In terms of the Technical Advisory Committee, we tried to really pick a range of folks with a range of backgrounds because everyone reviewed all of the applications. And so, if you were a wildlife specialist, you also reviewed the Connecting People to Nature proposals. And just to get a different perspective and a broad range, that's the way we set it up. So there were all of the people on the Technical Advisory Committee were ineligible to apply for the funding. So just conflict of interest there's none. So we had three folks from Sustainable Development, 2 from Manitoba Agriculture, 2 folks from Environment and Climate Change Canada, a representative from the Clean Environment Commission, and then there was two staff members from MHHC that also sat in the advisory committee. Ultimately, this matrix is what we're going to try and slot the different projects into, and this is it's being developed right now, and so this is an ongoing thing. But basically, what we want to be able to do is take all of the project activities that were funded through the individual projects, look at their project metrics or their outputs, so acre feet of water stored or acres of restoration, etc., and then translate those into ecological goods and services outcomes. And then those are all around the Conservation Trust priorities. So basically, what we're asking the applicant to do is report to MHHC up until that second red circle there, or the project metric. And so they're going to outline, they're going to select their trust category, their project type, etc. Then they're going to outline what they plan to do, and they're going to detail for us what they have done. And then MHHC, likely through a contract with an outside organization, is going to establish some conversion of those project metrics or outputs into EGS outcomes for the trust, so that we can then report that up to the province. So that last large red circle is what MHHC is going to do. So in terms of the first round, like I said, we're just in the process of cutting checks right now. Really excited about all this. This is the first intake was I think a huge success. Timelines were really tight. And this was just the nature of getting the agreement signed and get everything in place. The original announcement, the public announcement, occurred on December 10th of 2018, so right before Christmas. And then we were cruel and we said, can you have your letter of interest completed by the middle of January? So it was tight. And I think we ended up losing some potential applicants because of that, because it was just, it's a busy time of year, lots of people on holidays, and you're trying to close the calendar year end, but we couldn't do anything about it. Once the potential fund recipients got comments, sent their LOI in, they got comments back. That Gabrielle and Krista, our staff here, were provided. So they provided each applicant comments on their letter of interest. And then they were given a few weeks to complete the application process. Interesting thing that the trust is doing is we're doing everything online. So we're trying to go basically completely paperless. And so even the Technical Advisory Committee reviewed everything through online portals and tablets, and we're really trying to make sure we don't take down a bunch of trees and trying to support conservation in Manitoba. So yeah, that was a key step that we took, and it took some time to dial in that system, but it sounds like people were generally very favorable of the online process. So anyways, February 22nd was when the intake closed, and then we really turned around and projects were being announced by the Premier on the 15th of April. And so a key thing that, especially for MHHC receiving a lot of grants in the past, a frustration that we can experience and we hear from our partners is that, if you get approval, you apply for a project in the fall, and then it goes into a black hole, and you potentially don't hear until June or something like that of the following year, and that can really impact field activities for the summer. And so, as the Conservation Trust is really striving to get everything out basically by April 1 now going forward, so that all the applicants can have their money confirmed and in place so they can start any of their field activities, just as when the snow is off the fields and out of the trees, they can get in there, and so we're really trying to do that and achieve that. In the first intake, we had $2.6 million available. That's less than the $5 million you've been hearing me talk about, and that was just a consequence of when the $100 million investment was actually provided to the Winnipeg Foundation, and when revenues can start to be generated off that. And actually, in the first year, the province provided kind of top-up funding to get the projects rolling and the program going. So really proud. 41 projects were funded from 31 different organizations. $2.2 million in funds were dispersed, and that realized almost $5.6 million in match funding. So it was about 2.5 to 1 in a match ratio. So our recipients were able to achieve that, or actually exceed the 2 to 1 match ratio. About half of all of the applicants applied under the watersheds funding category. Like I mentioned earlier, we received no applications from the soil health category, and we actually received more applications than we anticipated in the connecting people to nature. And so that's, obviously there's a need for that out there and a desire by organizations to find funding for those projects. But we ended up approving slightly less than what was actually available, and that was just the way it worked out. And I think in future years the demand will be there, and we're making some tweaks to make sure that going forward we'll be able to disperse all the funding that we have available to us. Just as some examples of the projects that we did fund this go around, Ducks Unlimited put an outstanding proposal in on the Prairie Pothole and Grassland Restoration Project, and so this is in their wheelhouse. They went wetland restoration, grassland restoration, doing some wetland and grassland securement, and they were able to demonstrate how they were hitting all of the key outcomes for the Conservation Trust: water quality, flood mitigation, drought resilience, biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and enhanced soil health. So that was a strong proposal. They received funding under the watersheds category. Another project under watersheds was submitted by Cooks Creek. They're a conservation district that's just east of Winnipeg, and they were going to do a water retention project. And so they have lots of flooding issues, and so they have an area where they're going to be able to hold some water. There's going to be 110 acre-feet of water storage. There is going to be some permanent water held within the storage area. Therefore creating wetland habitat, and they're going to install some nesting structures, and they're going to do some really interesting stuff in enhancing the habitat around the area. So they identified flood mitigation, drought resilience, increased biodiversity, carbon sequestration, and soil health as some of their their key outcomes from that project. So again, that's under the watersheds category. Really exciting project by Bird Studies Canada is enhancing avian species at risk applicability in conservation delivery. And so this is under the habitat and wildlife categories. And so what they're trying to do is they're going to be working with about 12 landowners in southwest Manitoba. And they're going to try and get them working together so that they're collectively managing their lands as kind of a unit or one whole under a whole grazing strategy or a community grazing strategy, with the intent of trying to enhance the habitat for species at risk. And so this is a really exciting project, and this is something that I'm quite pleased that we were able to provide funding for. I consider this really innovative, and trying to get private landowners to manage their lands together as a unit I think it's going to be challenging, but I think it's exceptional. So they identified increased biodiversity, enhanced carbon sequestration as some key outcomes for their project. The West Souris River Conservation District put together a habitat and wildlife project. So these are just some of the key highlights. Like I said, we did fund 41 projects, and I'm just giving you a couple of examples here. West Souris River, they're down in southwest Manitoba. They wanted to establish pollinator habitat in the mixed grass prairie region. So they're going to be putting in planting some pollinator habitat, some grasses, some wildflowers. They're going to be installing some shelter belts, and you can see the list of outcomes that they hope to provide there. Interesting thing with this one, there was some concern around the technical advisory committee about planting a bunch of shelter belts on native prairie, and that is obviously because that's not desirable. And that's totally not what they're doing. And so this is really taking cultivated land and sowing it down and improving the habitat. So this is really a habitat enhancement activity for wildlife. An innovative project put forward by the International Institute for Sustainable Development and in partnership with CEIR, or the Center for Indigenous Environmental Resources, is a planning project. And this is really looking to fundamentally connect Indigenous peoples and communities with municipalities in the Winnipeg metropolitan region. And through those connections, developing a natural infrastructure action plan. And so this is basically looking at where are our natural assets out there, and connecting or breaking down some of the jurisdiction boundaries or blockages that can occur, and really managing the natural lands and the altered lands around Winnipeg for some significant watershed outcomes. So they're improving water quality, flood mitigation, drought resilience, and enhanced carbon sequestration. And in the last category, again, no projects under soil health. So this is the final one, is connecting people to nature. A Nature Conservancy, really strong proposal in basically looking to get volunteers out on some of their lands, get students out with nature-based programming linking to the curriculum, and really training up stewardship volunteers to go out and help manage and manage their lands and spread the conservation word. So through the management activities that will take place, they're going to be increasing biodiversity, enhancing public access to nature, and providing interpretive programs in natural areas. So this was a very strong connecting people to nature proposals that we did fund. And so for my final slide here, going forward, the process is going to be similar to what I outlined. There was no major flaws that were identified in the process. This was a huge success for for the trust and MHHC, and we look forward to completing all the contribution agreements for the 41 applicants, 31 organizations that did receive funding this year, $2.2 million. Our next call for proposals is probably going to be, well, it will be in the fall of 2019, so this fall. We are going to kind of stretch the application timeline a little bit, so we're not in the same time crunch as, making a public announcement and getting a call out in the middle of December and then providing funding by the middle of April. We'll be able to make a call in the fall, and then the objective is to have all the agreements and everything in place so that the applicants know what the funding is going to be by April 1, 2020. So yeah, that's our goal. Some of the tweaks that we are making to the process, there were organizational caps. There was organizational caps for each category. That might have limited some organizations in making. They could have done larger asks potentially, and we want to make sure that we can, put the $5 million in funding out on the landscape for quality projects. So we may look to remove or loosen those organizational caps of funding. Some slight tweaks to the online template, nothing really minor. And again, that's the online application process that everyone went through. We are, as of just yesterday, actually, we did host a proposal writing workshop with conservation districts. So all the district managers and some of the financial administrators were out, and we gave them kind of a proposal writing 101 review of what the Conservation Trust is looking to fund. And this is really to ensure that quality applications are coming in, and they were very, very receptive, and we got very positive feedback about the workshop. So we're going to be continuing to do that with other organizations. We're not just focusing on conservation districts here. We're going to be providing materials to other organizations as well. And then we're going to ramp up the advertising and promotion of the fund as well. So for you on the other side of my computer screen, their contact information is there. I encourage you to get in touch with us. Gabrielle Miller is here with me again, and Christa Doucette is our other grants associate. And they are more than willing to chat with folks and answer questions. So there's our contact details there, ctinfo@mhhc.mb.ca. Shoot us an email. But at this point, if there are any questions, I would be, I'll do my best to answer those. Thanks for your attention and your time.
Oh, okay, thank you, Stephen. If anybody does have questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll get them answered for you.
Okay, not really seeing any. Ian, do you have some? Or?
Yep. Oh. Can you use in-kind support as match?
Absolutely. We recognize that for a lot of organizations, the 2-to-1 match can be challenging at times. In-kind match is completely acceptable to include, and honestly, there's no scoring criteria on ratio of cash to in-kind match. And so, yeah, we accept in-kind match, no problem.
Great comprehensive webinar. Is it possible for funding to roll into the next fiscal year if unspent in the current fiscal year for which the project was approved?
There is potentially a little bit of flexibility to do that. It depends on how much. We are restricted. Basically, with the Winnipeg Foundation needs to spend a certain amount of money of its interest each year. And so, and that's rules, as because they're a foundation, that's rules established by Canadian Revenue Agency. And so they're obligated to release a certain amount of funding. And so that means that we have to make sure that that amount of funding is spent within the fiscal year. Smaller amounts we could roll over, but generally we're going to be restricted to fiscal years. But we will be able to do multi-year projects as well. So if a project proponent wants to do a 2-year project, they can spread the funding out over 2 years. And back to the in-kind match question as well, they can actually go back a year to get matching dollars to support the project as well.
Great webinar. Thank you. Appreciate the ongoing nature of Conservation Trust versus a 5-year time limit, for example, encourages long-term planning and initiatives. That appears to be it for the questions, Stephen. If anybody else does have specific questions that they have for Stephen, his contact information is here on the bottom of the webinar, or you can contact myself and I can get them to him. Thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. We will be back in September with more webinars. Have a great summer, everybody. And again, thank you, Stephen. We appreciate you taking the time to do your webinar today.
Well, thank you, Ian, and thanks to all the people that attended, and to Hugh and Erica for your questions.
Okay, great. Well, have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Take care.